did you grow up? Where did you attend school? What did you study? That type of thing.
Brief personal background is that I was the second child in a family of two in a military family, and we moved all over the country. I was born in San Francisco. I ended up in Virginia, and I went to high school at Granby High School, and then I went to Old Dominion University. I married a teacher, and I started teaching. So
What did you teach?
I was a physical education teacher.
Perfect match for your baseball coach husband. Right?
Exactly.
Wow, fascinating. When did you decide that you wanted to become a counselor, a college counselor? Was that something that evolved, or did you just sort of almost know that from the beginning?
There was no design. It was by default. It was an accident. My major in college, physical education, I taught physical education, which meant that the students that I taught, I was able to develop a relationship with. And I noticed that other teachers in the classroom didn't develop the same relationships. But I also was pregnant at a time when people were not allowed to finish out their year of service, and so I was forced to resign at the end, in my 5th month of pregnancy with my first child. And well, by the time the second child came along and I wasn't working and I wasn't going to school and I had these 2 children, and it was a very miserable thunderstorm, lightning, horrible, awful day, and the electricity went out, and I had an infant and a 2-year-old, and by the end of the day I said, I need to be around some adults. And so I went back to school then and took one class at a time. I took classes in counseling because I think I never understood myself, and I thought that would help me understand myself a little better. And then it was just, when I went to practice my skills, I had to do an internship, but there was nobody who would take me but this little school in Virginia Beach that was trying to make a go of it, and they didn't have a counselor, and they didn't even have classrooms that had walls that went up all the way up. So they took me because I was free. And I worked for my internship, and then after I finished my internship, it worked me into a job, and I worked part-time, and then it ended up being 34 years later, it was like overtime.
And this was Cape Henry to begin with?
Yeah, it was Cape Henry. And I wore multiple different hats within the institution. Whatever needed to be done, I did it. And so when I finished my last year, when I retired, I was doing lots of jobs in addition to being the college counselor. So, but I didn't go into counseling because I knew that I was called into counseling. But once I got into it, there was not one day that I went to work that I didn't love going.
Wow.
So, yeah.
And you did, you almost came full circle, as you said, because you started out doing it, one of every kind of job, and you ended up basically doing one of every kind of job.
Yeah, it added variety and made it a lot more interesting. I couldn't stand doing the same thing all day long. Every student brought something different to the table, and every student was a challenge. I would always measure the work I did not by the good students at the top of the class, because they can get into just about any college. It's by the students who maybe don't have a lot of confidence or have limited options. I would measure the kind of job I was doing based on the results that they would get and how it fit who they were and how it affected them and impacted them in their lives. So, I mean, the good kids always have lots of choices, but it's the ones that sometimes are at the bottom of the class.
They need that extra touch, that extra piece of attention. Yeah.
They were the ones I liked working with.
Tell me about your first exposure to NACAC, your first exposure to PCACAC, which came first, and how did it all come about?
Well, it all came about because of a college admissions officer who, I don't know why he visited Cape Henry, but he visited Cape Henry, which was basically, looked a little like it was a tin building sitting on the side of the road with, we had 5, 6 students in the class graduating, but the admissions officer from Washington and Lee, Van Pate, came to Cape Henry and said to me, you really need to get involved with PCACAC. And I said, that sounds like a good idea, but I didn't mean it at all because I had never done anything like that. So he convinced me to go, and I think the first one I went to was in Williamsburg. In those days, PCAC meetings were in Williamsburg just about every year, and the College of William & Mary had the opportunity to host it just about every year. And then they got smart and divided the responsibility and moved around the regions a little bit. But the first conference that I went to that was some distance away that gave me a significant level of anxiety was the one that was in Ocean City. And they had it in a hotel that was on the beach. It was an incredibly foggy weekend. Never saw the water, but the conference dinner, the Sunday night dinner, was on an ice skating rink floor that was in the middle of the hotel, and it had plywood on the floor. And I sat next to Joe Monte, and I was hooked after that. Because
wow.
Joe just sucked me right in. But that was the first time. I mean, this seems so silly compared to how girls are raised today, but that was the first time that I had actually driven myself across the Bay Bridge Tunnel. My knuckles were white. I was so anxious the whole way up. And now today I don't give it a second thought. All of this has been a real confidence builder.
But it was a different time, a different place.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, how about NACAC? When did you become involved in NACAC, or was that a natural extension of being in PAC?
I think the NACAC was just kind of a natural move into going to the national conference and participating in that. It didn't happen in the same way that the PCAC happened.
Right.
But my involvement with PCAC happened because of another person, and that was Ginny Carey, who was then the Dean of Admission at the College of William & Mary. And she said, Arlene, we'd like to have you on the Admissions Practices Committee. I had no idea what it was, but it sounded like a good thing to do. And so I would go up and we'd talk about all this stuff that I really didn't know what I was talking about, but I learned a lot. And it was Ginny who really sort of pulled me into a leadership position in some way as being a committee member. And I was grateful to her for that.
Yeah, and that's still a good way to grow leadership.
Well, if you think about it, Van Pate from Washington and Lee, and Joe Monte, and Ginny Carey, they're people who pull you in, and that's the value of the organization. It's the relationships.
Yeah. So what made you decide, or were you pulled in again, to move into a leadership position and go into the presidential side? Or
well,
what
there
were the steps
again.
that got you there, I guess.
Yeah, I had no plans to do any of that. It just happened by default, not by design. Somebody asked me if I'd be treasurer. And I thought, well, I like money, and that might be kind of fun. And so when I accepted the job, I didn't realize that the treasurer just wrote checks, that there was no budget. And so the first thing I had to do was to create a budget. Well, I was not very popular with anybody in the organization because I was asking them to think about what they needed the money for instead of just spending money. But by the time I had finished being treasurer, we had a budget, and we could use that. We could see where our money was coming from and where our money was going. And that moved into developing, a fiscal policy manual and things like that help guide how we spend our money. But those were the days we didn't have any money. We had no money at all. And
so you hosted the conference, you took the money in from the conference, you spent the money out? Is
Yeah.
that kind of the way it went?
Yeah. Oh, well, no. We established budget line items according to the various committees, and the committee chairs needed to think about how much they needed for their committees. And conference, of course, was a part of that as well. So,
would you say that that piece was maybe your most significant contribution to PCAC, or are there other? You have so many significant contributions, I know.
well, I don't know that being the treasurer was the most significant contribution. My presidential year was one of probably unusual for many of the other presidents, because when I served as president, I came in thinking having some goals and thinking what I wanted to do, knowing that we had a new executive assistant, but it became apparent within a month or two that the executive assistant wasn't going to be able to do what needed to be done. And I had never been in the position of either hiring anyone or firing anyone, but we had to release that person from their contract, which basically meant firing. And then I had to make connections with NACAC and get a lawyer to help guide me through it. And it was not at all what I anticipated in my presidential year. I think the thing that I might be really proud of is the fact that without an executive assistant, a conference planning site coordinator, and without much support, we had the largest conference that we had had in a long time. And still, even today, we don't have many. There were like 430 people who attended the conference. It was held in Baltimore, and our conference social was at the ballpark. Now, maybe that's what got everybody there. I don't know. But I got a tour of the underground of the ballpark, and then got to stand on the first base line while they congratulated me and PCACAC for bringing so many people to their Baltimore Orioles game.
And that
was about 10 or 11 years ago.
I think that was my first PCAC conference.
Yeah, that may have been.
Yeah.
I don't know. I have, over the years, served in a number of roles and credentials and professional development. Yeah. I love working on professional development. Loved working with Sue Rexford and Shirley Bloomquist on the Summer Institute. And I think that we were able to give that some institutionalize that. Yes. That's what we did. Yes. There wasn't anything. And I also was so excited about developing the college counseling 101s. Yes. That led to, what are they called now?
Drive-in workshops.
Oh yeah, the drive-in workshops with the same idea, where we would just do workshops around the region. And I think we've institutionalized those now as well.
Share your experience of how College Counseling 101 came about. That is a great story.
College Counseling 101 came about because we had an executive, maybe it was a summer retreat or something like that, a leadership, whatever. Yeah. And on the way home, I was with a couple of other PCAC members, Ann Powell and Betty Jones, and we sat in the car, and by the time we got back from wherever we were, we had a whole College Counseling 101 plan. We had about 100 people, and the first one was held in Norfolk, at Norfolk Collegiate, which was Betty Jones's school. I was also very proud of my association connection with the Ann Powell mentoring program, and with development of the first leadership notebook, putting all of that together. JB, Jennifer Blair, and I were the first ones to do the summer retreat for the officers. She and I had gone to LDI, Leadership Development Institute, at, I think it was in Toronto. It was really a great place to have it. And we heard of other ACACs that were doing it. We said, you know what, there is no reason why we can't do it. So that was in July. By the middle of August, we had our first leadership retreat at my school. It was 4 hours on a Wednesday morning, and all the officers came. Well, the board was about half the size of what it is now. But there was no money, so I used my school budget to help underwrite it. So,
what is your vision now? Where do you see PCAC or NACAC being in 10 years maybe 20 years? You know, open up your eyes and look into a crystal ball. What would you see? How do you see the profession moving or changing or continuing to evolve?
Yeah, well, I think the organizations both continue to evolve. And one of the things that makes the organization so special is that it tries to be responsive to the needs of its community, and yet to reach out and try to get those underserved kids. And I think that's the area that they work very hard to get a grasp on, and I think that's an area that will remain high profile, because mentoring and bringing young people into having opportunities is important. But I think we have to train the people to do it, so I think those are going to be priorities. Other than that, I think that the organization has reached an elevated state of maturity. It's in good shape, and now it's a matter of polishing and continuing to be responsive and sensitive to the needs of the community.
Okay, we know you retired this past year. What's in Arlene Ingram's future?
Oh, Arlene Ingram doesn't have any idea. I live each day with reckless abandon. It's a lot of fun. I have to tell you, today we had the luncheon speaker says there are two things that are really important. One is relationships, and the other is to have a cause. And for 34 years, when I worked, every single day I would go to school, I had a cause. I had a reason to be there. I wanted to do everything I could to help those kids. And I'm not sure, I'm assessing now where I can put that energy that's going to have some value. It was just fortuitous that Allie Gouch pulled me in to help with this conference, and I realized that this is what I love to do. Could be, PCACAC may be a cause, I don't know, but it's something I love. It's a part of who I am. It means a lot, so I don't know.
If you could give one piece of advice to someone who's fairly new or even brand new into the profession, what would that piece of advice be?
Somebody who's new to the profession, I think would probably be to accept each student who comes into your office. If it's a high school counselor and it's somebody I'm mentoring, accept them where they are and listen to what they have to say and help them move to their next step without putting your values on what they want. Leave your values at the door and work with who they are and what they want. That's a good question. I'll probably have a better answer later.
That's a pretty good answer. I think it's certainly an answer that we could all live with and be comfortable with and would be well-serving students if we did. Any last thoughts? Anything you'd like to say to the millions who will be watching this?
Yeah, I've loved everything I've done with PCACAC. PCACAC is my family, and it's been everything that I have done. While there have been some great frustrations over, some of the things I've done, when you work in a volunteer organization, that happens. But it's also a family, a community, a group of people who love each other, who care about each other, and who care about the kids. And it's been a great ride. It's been a great ride. I've loved every minute of it.
So don't stop.
Not every minute. Thanks.